would you want it to do?
Well, I think it's a clever move. I'm not against it, because if it decides.
But we are paying judges to give answers, not to be clever. What would you want the court to do?
I really don't know. For me, it's really hard to decide on this kind of cases in Europe when it's so diverse. So Europe is really diverse, because some cases would be kind of accepted in the UK. For example, in Poland, that would be the total opposite. So.
Are you originally from Poland?
Yes.
Catholic society, religion is playing a much more strong role. I'll come back to, but
no, I just wanted to say that, I mean, the European Court is very sort of fond of using the term lack of consensus. But I mean, that's, it should, I personally think it should do what the Inter-American Court is doing, overriding consensus of states, because if it relies on consensus in lawmaking, when the court has sort of a duty when it comes to lawmaking, in international law, then it sort of opens a box of political contexts also coming in. So I think that it can perhaps borrow a lead from the American Court and override consensus.
This is a very good point. We'll discuss it in half an hour from now, when we will move to the Frete versus Atala Rifo case, where the two courts took a different position exactly on the basis of consensus. And I will divide you in two groups. On the one hand will be the priests, like you're a priest, and on the other hand it will be the governments, the state officials. Because this is a clash again between sovereignty versus, okay, we'll come back to that. But before that, you said that this is a hard case. Do we all agree that this is a hard case, or it is an easy case for you? Easy or hard?
I think it's a very polarised issue, because even in the United Kingdom law, like Northern Ireland, it's illegal to get an abortion and women have to travel to Scotland or England for an abortion. So if in one state itself it's that polarised, then it's obvious that the court can't come to a decision.
And with regard to abortions, there is a very important case of the European Court of Human Rights called ABC versus Ireland, where the court said, well, is there consensus? Same tool, said yes, most societies in Europe, most nations in Europe think that abortion should be allowed. So everyone was expecting it to say, Ireland, shut up and proceed with abortions. And then said, yes, but the Irish people are so sensitive about this, and they even had a referendum and they are opposing to this, etc., etc. So we should allow them to keep prohibiting abortions, okay? But all these cases, and I could give you more examples of cases that are morally sensitive. The question here is, what is the basis for a court to provide an answer? This is what I want you to reflect. So, the European Court of Human Rights, in that particular case, it relied on consensus. I'll explain you in a while, and we will discuss in more detail what consensus is. But according to you, if you were a judge, what is the basis, what is the foundation you would use in order to provide an answer to such questions? When life begins? When does it begin?
When is the legal definition of life?
So?
What is the legal definition of life?
This is just an example. We can discuss abortions. We can discuss euthanasia. We can discuss gay rights. Okay? We can discuss consent and having a relationship with a minor. Okay? All these are issues that raise sensitive moral questions. And the question for you is, what are the tools, what are the criteria that a judge should apply in order to provide an answer? Either it will be something random, or we will have something that will be, a basis that will rely and will guide us in all similar cases. So, any foundations?
Human rights principles.
Human rights principles. What is a human rights principles?
Well, the human rights principles are commonly agreed upon, so cross-cutting aspects of all human rights as applicable to all human beings.
Okay, so some examples.
Well, non-discrimination, equality,
So,
universality.
equality, non-discrimination. So, principles. Like equality, plus non-discrimination. Other ones?
Universality and universality, inalienability.
Universality will be a consequence of that if this is true. Other principles?
Well, it's like interrelatedness and interdependence of human rights.
Interdependence is the respect, protect, fulfillment that I would associate with it. But other principles, you're moving to the right direction. I gave you also to read the paper by Bronsworth or whatever. Eh? Yes. So principles, other principles, another fundamental principle. Dignity. Other one. Other principles. Liberty, maybe. Principles could be one option. Other options.
Consent.
Consent. I will associate it with liberty. I'm free to choose, I'm free to decide, as long as there is no consent from my side, you have no right to do. Okay? Other key concepts?
If we're going to talk about consent, should we bring also harm and precaution? How you were in the first article that you gave us
It would apply, but it would only apply with regard to positive. So not to complicate things, it's part of diligence. So not to complicate things, just leave it aside. Other ones?
Well, we've been talking about consensus. So consensus is a way that
Consensus means what?
agreed upon by the region as ways of civility.
Standard.
Standard set by whom in principle then? Consensus? What kind of consensus is the court investigating? Consensus between states. So, state will. Let's remind you of something. Semester 1, the basis of international law. Other bases or other rules. Do you think that blood transfusion should be banned? No? 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 Should someone be allowed to deny consent and say, well, science suggests that I should have blood transfusion, however, I don't want to do it. Should that person be allowed to do that? Yes or no?
There was a case with Jehovah's Witnesses.
This is what I'm implying here. Yeah?
There was a case, was it a minor? And then
That would be my next question. So, an adult, should they be allowed to decide about blood transfusion on the basis of consent? Yes or no? Should they be allowed to say, I don't want to have blood transfusion? Yes or no? Yes? No?
Yes.
If you disagree, just raise your hands. I mean, I want us to debate this issue. So, the more controversial they are, the happier I will be. So, is there anyone here who says that an adult should not be allowed to say no blood transfusion? Yes or no?
It's self-consent, isn't it? If the individual says, I don't want a transfusion, you have to respect that. But if a family member says, there's my unconscious brother there, he needs a transfusion, I'm saying, no, the brother doesn't have the right.
So it has to be only the person concerned, tissue concerned, okay? What about minors? Can a father or a mother, because of religious beliefs, say, well, let my son die. This is God's will.
No, a court will be more than likely to interfere as they did in the case of Jehovah's Witness.
Okay, no.
There was another case where there was a kid who was like, I don't know, I think he was like 15 or something, and he said he didn't want a blood transfusion, and then the courts decided that he had to have a blood transfusion, and then he got to like 19, he was really sick and he needed another one, and he refused it, and he then died because he didn't have a blood transfusion.
This raises another interesting question. When should someone be an adult for legal purposes? 18, 17, 16? Who decides? And on the basis of what criteria? A step back. Anyone saying that Jehovah's Witnesses should have the right to refuse blood transfusion for their children?
In a life or death situation, no. But in a jam situation, there's alternatives.
But this is a question of liberty, of freedom. This is their choice.
On small issues, then yet you have the right.
I think that they should be allowed to for the children because, like, it's their belief that it's damning them to hell for, like, all eternity if they have the blood transfusion, and that's such a strong belief that they feel that they're condemning their child to let them do that. So if they feel like it's better for them, then they should be allowed to, like, refuse the blood transfusion.
So should religion be added here?
I think in a lot of states, religion is a very ingrained principle. It's such a big part of the fabric of the makeup of the state. You can't ignore it.
Dissociate.
Like with Northern Ireland.
Or
Religion is
Poland,
such
or
yeah,
Italy,
it's-
Greece,
it's so
Mexico.
fundamental.
But as is in case of the right to private family life, the court can interpret if there is a danger. So in this kind of cases, when the children is about to die and the parents are like, no, the court should intervene. The court should say, no, like this is surreal.
Even if the parents don't want something to happen, the state has like the right to protect. I mean, every person has a right to life, the duty to protect somebody's life.
But this is what we are discussing in the book case. When does that duty start? Does it start after inception? It starts after 3 weeks? It starts after 9 months? When does it start? And who decides about that?
I don't know. Sorry.
I mean, go ahead. Did you
don't-
raise your hand? No.
Today.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I don't know if this is an accepted principle, but like Roe versus Wade, the case that laid down in the US about abortion, it spoke about how after in the third trimester, it has recognizable human features, and
Says who that?
the court, the US Supreme Court.
So judges woke up in the morning and said, when is life beginning? Well, 3 months after.
Something like that.
Did they rely on something else?
The fact that they respond to certain stimulus and develop a human form.
And who says that it responds to certain stimulus?
Doctors, I suppose?
Doctors. Science. Someone else wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that basically the courts as lawyers, they have just certain amount of knowledge. They never study science, or maybe some of them, but like they don't have the knowledge that scientists have So the science until life begins in whatever 23rd of life. And
The vote case would have been much easier had doctors, had science provided a definition. If biologists would say, life starts 2 weeks after inception, then we would be in a position to know, and this would be quasi-automatic then. 2 weeks after inception, this is right to life, this is manslaughter, France failed to prosecute that person on that basis. But science did not give us an answer. Religion gives answers, but for some people this is very important, this is fundamental. For some other people this is nonsense. Why? Because it doesn't have any kind of scientific proof. It is a question of belief. But as you said, religion in some societies is so much embedded in the society and interconnected with politics, etc. It's also an identity issue, etc., etc., etc.
We've moved on since then, but what I was going to say regarding some earlier points is the level of harm to the child and the proportionality.
Okay, the level of the harm, but this is the next step, okay? Because in order to apply proportionality, we would need first to establish that this is a right to life issue. If we could do that, yes, then this is the next step in the reasoning.
I'm going to say, in regard to science, I think it's unsurprising that they can't provide what they didn't provide a starting point for that. Even in sort of UK law, the weeks at which abortion can be carried out has gone back and forth in the recent years, and I think even now and again the debate is bringing back up, should they push it back, should they bring it forward? Because it's ever changing, you can't pronounce, you can't.
Which means that in the absence of that, we are blind. We know nothing. But still we need to provide an answer. Because we live in a society and we want to have certain standards, we want to have certain rules. Otherwise it is the chaos, it's jungle. So, we are here. And the question is, what is the right basis to answer that kind of question? So, Jehovah's Witnesses, should they be allowed to refuse blood transfusion for the children? Just raise your hands. Who is in favor of that? That this is a right, the right of the parent. No Jehovah's Witnesses in this room.
I think that they should be listened to, but I think if you've got a child, again, it depends on their, not even just their age, their own, where they are in their own life. If you've got a child who's 14 years old, say, and seems to believe in the religion and also hold the same opinions, then maybe, yeah, you could get the final say from the parent after also speaking to the child, but I just don't think it's a case of ignoring the child. And when a child is so young that they maybe are unable to consent themselves or give any indication towards consent, then you shouldn't listen to the parent if it is in a life or death situation.
But if it is an adult, then they should be free to decide.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Then can I go tomorrow before domestic courts and say, well, it is my human right to drive without a safety belt. The reason why we have a safety belt is the positive aspect of the right to life. Nations, states create an obligation for me and they sanction me if I don't wear a safety belt as a means to fulfill their duty to protect my human life. If you allow a Jehovah's Witness to withdraw from blood transfusion, then you should also allow me to drive without a safety belt. Do you agree with that conclusion?
No.
Why?
I think it's a different type of obligation. I think if someone's, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I think that if you don't wear a seatbelt and then you hit a really big pothole in a road and then you really injured yourself or something. The pothole in the
It's
road.
my right. If the Jehovah's Witness wants to, bring those consequences that will derive from from his refusal or their refusal to take blood, then I should be allowed to bring those consequences to me because of not wearing a safety belt.
But there's a founding in the belief of a religion, but there's not in just driving.
It's very easy. I can tell you that this is my religious belief. I can invent a religion like that. Do you know Pastafarians? Have you ever heard of Pastafarians? Huh? I believe in the big spaghetti, the big pasta. Yeah. So it's somewhere in the universe. Yeah, exactly. So this is my religious belief. I could very easily make that argument.
I would say the state's sort of positive obligation to protect the child would trump the sort of obligation not to interfere with the religion. That's how I would look at it. So there are more ways. There's also some more
This is a question of giving priority to consent or maybe the human dignity.
I'd say if we're talking about cases where a child's life rests on the decision not to have a blood transfusion, that could to some extent be linked to the right of life, potentially. And I'd say that would trump the right to religious freedom, which is the case with sort of not having a transfusion on religious grounds. I'd say one would trump the other.
And linking this with what we did in week number 2, do you remember proportionality? I talked with the 3 levels: suitability, necessity, proportionality stricto sensu. And I was telling you that proportionality stricto sensu is no more technical. It is just a value judgment. It is what trumps, what is more weighted than another. What you did is just proportionality stricto sensu, and for you, right to life is more important than religion. But for some other people, religion might be more important than right to life. And then the question is the legitimacy of judges. I had quite a few ones, so it was...
I just want to make 2 points, like short ones. The first, that I think that states has obligation, like states should do everything in their power to protect people. This is their main job, for me, according to my opinion. So for example, if someone wants to drive without the seatbelts, they should ban not driving with seatbelts on, because their reasoning is, I want to protect people. So in the same case,
should they ban alcohol?
It's a cultural thing also. No, but another point.
I eat a lot, obviously. Should they ban, so they put restrictions in what I eat?
For example, in some countries there is a ban of drinking in public places, because alcohol public places become dangerous. There are some also like kind of partly bans on alcohol in certain places. So it actually they do that for safety reasons.
So are they wrong or are they right?
I think they are right. This is the state obligation, and this is what states should do to protect their people. And my second point, like a quick one, that combination of politics, the government, and religion in one, trust me, is the worst combination that can happen. So for me, when it comes to law and religion, the religion always.
Okay, let's leave religion outside for. I brought it just to yeah. We will not have it. I was taking in the past another module on the European Convention of Human Rights, and there was a session for 2 hours discussing limits of religion and interaction with human rights. But let's leave this aside for the moment. My point here is exactly this, is that different countries, different societies set different standards. In some countries, you're allowed to go with no limit in the autobahn, in the highway. In some countries, they tell you 70 miles, that's the maximum. In some countries, they tell you you're free to suicide. In some others, they tell you no, this is a crime. You will be euthanasia. So, different societies, different standards. What are the criteria? And is there a right criteria? let me give you another example. This comes also from the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Do you know, this is, British people, you might know it because this was a local star. Like, something like the Running Rambler. Have you ever heard of that guy? Running Rambler? So, this is a guy, crazy for me, who wants to walk around the earth. So the purpose of his life is to walk, he's walking, okay? And he wants to do this naked. Okay? Fine. The UK punished him for that. And he went before the European Court of Human Rights. And he said, you know something? This is private life, family, legal bases are always very flexible. After all, this is a matter of liberty, freedom. I want to be naked. Do you know that there is such a right? And what is the basis for that?
It's the impact on society.
What is the impact on you if you see someone naked?
Oh, yeah, impact on me, but my beats might impact on him if he's walking past little children.
Okay, so protect children. I can see this argument, yeah? Imagine a society where we would all be naked. Would that be a problem for children?
No, because then it's normalised.
Okay, who decides about this? How this is happening then? What is the criteria? First of all, would you have a problem with public nudity? Just raise your hands again. Be as conservative or as progressive in brackets you want to be.
It's walking in the middle of summer now, yeah.
No, I'm talking, we open the window and then we see naked people here. Would that be a problem for you, a society like that?
As it stands.
As it stands.
I'd like to say no, but I think that I would have to do a double take.
Okay.
The chances are that there's not going to be a lot of model was walking past.
Anyone who would be in favor of public nudity? As a matter of liberty?
I'm a bit chilly.
This is the issue.
Only in designated spaces.
And this
So
way,
if you can have a public nude beach, so
like
you
in the zoo. We'll have the zoo and we'll have a place for naked people.
no, like a beach, but not a beach.
A bit, okay. So, do you agree with me that this is an extreme? Okay? Okay, so this is the one end. Naked. Okay? The European Court of Human Rights, by the way, in a very good case, said that, well, you want to be naked? Let's count how many nations in Europe are allowing this to happen. Nil. Zero. So, no European consensus, so get dressed and shut up. This was the message by the European Court of Human Rights. What would be the exactly opposite? Did you see what happened last summer with Muslims in France who wanted to go to the beach?
Oh yeah, they had to be. They couldn't be.
They couldn't wear their burqas,
Cacophony. Just one.
Bikini ban.
Yes? Okay, what is this? Can you explain to everyone? France said you're not allowed to swim.
Everyone knows what a bikini is, but a Muslim bikini was like a full body.
So fully dressed.
In the water.
Fully dressed. Everything covered. And France said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Okay? So, fully dressed. Fully dressed, I mean everything. Only the eyes. Okay? We know what is a burqa. Yes? These are two extremes. Absolutely naked, absolutely dressed. How many variations, how many choices we have in between those two extremes?
Lot.
Hmm?
A lot.
A lot. Can you give me examples coming from different societies, ideally?
Wearing shorts and a t-shirt, or wearing.
The shorts. Is wearing the shorts acceptable for you? Should we be
It
free?
depends in a social context. I mean, they're not prohibited by law, but certain
I see your point. Yeah, if you go to see your professor, you should be dressed properly. If you go to see your boyfriend or partner, you should be okay. Yes, this is the social context. But let's say about the law, setting a prohibition, setting a limit. Do you know of any societies where if you would wear shorts, you would be arrested?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Or Greece 50 years ago. Which is not Saudi Arabia.
Oh, Iran as well.
I mean, plenty of,
Yeah.
I mean, Muslim society. Was it the same 20 years ago? 50 years ago? Yes or no? No. So my point is that today in the UK we are here, quasi-naked. If you go to on a Saturday night to a pub or something like that, we are towards that extreme. If you go to a different society, or if you travel to 50 years ago, this would be here, or this could be here. First point. Morality changes, evolves. Second question. Should human rights be an issue of morality? Which means that the naked traveler today is someone who is going against the society, but maybe in 50 years from now, he's a case study in universities. And we all say, you see how oppressive Europe was. They didn't allow us to be free, to be... Who is right, who is wrong? Should I put it here, here, or here? Who decides? This is the problem with human rights.
Is that why the European Convention on Human Rights, for example, describes a living instrument which change? It's time to try, to some respect, respond to changes. I'm not sure if morality is the right word for it, sort of the distinct changing pattern.
This is, so the European Court of Human Rights says the European Convention is a living instrument. It evolves, it changes together with the society. On the other hand, this US Supreme Court, Judge Scalia, mentioned him again, he had this theory, the originalist, who was saying rules are frozen on time, they should be interpreted in exactly the same way as at the time they were created. Okay? So the US Constitution is really old, we should stick to what they had in mind 200 years ago.
I think that there's rights that, like the right to life, doesn't change, that stays forever, like we were talking about the first generation one. But then other rights where you say like equality or non-discrimination, yeah, they're always there, but the way they are then interpreted does change with time. So they are stuck from when they were written in the sense that they still exist, but the way we interpret them has to change with time.
I don't know if the right to life changes
Maybe not the right to
in the
life.
sense that, and this is the next question we'll raise, if we accept that there is evolution, what is the methodology to capture evolution? We will come to that in a minute. But what I know for sure is that different societies in different times give different answers as to the right to life. And you have many sensitive questions. When life begins, abortion, euthanasia, safety bed. This did not exist 50 years ago. This is now. We need to protect human life. Forced feeding. What do you think about forced feeding of prisoners? Should someone be allowed to make a hunger strike? Or we should force feed that person and say, you know something? Yeah, you will eat no matter whether you want it or not because you need to live.
It's a violation of autonomy and bodily integrity.
So this is a violation of autonomy. It goes to liberty and consent.
Is it Article 8 that covers sort of, well, Islamic covers sort of physical integrity as well and sort of the mental state? So for me that would be...
It would be right to the European Convention of Human Rights, but this is not this. So for you, this applies here. But when I ask you about Jehovah's Witnesses, no integrity, no liberty, no autonomy, for you, we need...
Well, it's a difference between, so my argument was in relation to can a parent refuse the saving of the child's life. We're talking here about an adult. You know, should an adult be force fed? No, because they've got more bodily integrity.
Why they've got more bodily integrity?
There's been a lot of, so in regards to children versus adults, there's certain things that kids can something really do, that the Gillick test we've got, the Gillick competence and so on. There's certain things because of their age and that they haven't yet been developed. You have to draw a line somewhere. Certain things they can consent to and not. Whereas an adult said, well, legally.
And when do you become an adult? I raised this question earlier. In some societies it's 16, 17, 18, 21.
I think inclined to say 16, however.
16 for you. Do you agree 16?
I don't think you can put a single age on it. I think it's something that's dependent on different people and different people's lives.
Yeah, but you cannot make an individual assessment every time.
I think it's also dependent on different societies.
Different societies, that's exactly the point I'm again trying to make.
So I think it's easier to put a blanket age and then make exceptions as opposed to having, right, we're going to make an individual ruling every time. If you have got...
It could be, but my point is that as a society we need to set a line. We put a line. Okay? And the first question I want to examine with you today is how we put that line. And the second question is who puts that line. We will discuss it later on. But the first point here is that in human rights, both domestic and international, we have some cases that are very easy to answer. Why? Because in a sense we all agree in the society. But there are so many cases that are so, sensitive, so ambiguous, so controversial, and somehow we need to set a line. You're allowed to be next up to here. Okay? Why not here? In this society, it is here. Who decides?
Social.
Liberty and consent about, force feeding. So, would you also say, so imagine there is someone who wants to suicide and he's about or she's about to jump from the 8th floor. Should the fire brigade go with this protective net to rescue the person, yes or no?
I mean, you
It's
should...
easy to
It
ask them to clear it up.
is a tough one, but I'm trying to give you that one to explain you that.
Like, you shouldn't prod him over the edge to enable him, and you should take preventative measures. And
But-
you try and catch him.
But
I mean,
force feeding also is a preventative measure. You feed that person so that he or she doesn't die. If you tell me that this is a question of liberty and consent, then the fire brigade would be breaking human rights every time they put a safety net. Instead, according to your argument, they would simply enough say, there is another one who wants to commit a suicide today. Okay, yeah, go on, go ahead. It's a question of autonomy. And this is also why I'm insisting on this, because
I think
we are trying to establish a basis. And in international law, we are always vacillating between these two. The one is more constitutional, the other one is more international law. Okay, it's like what states want. But again, this is a point we will discuss in more detail in a few minutes. But again, this is not a solid basis. Why? Because if we take this to the extreme, we will be inconsistent. And we will be inconsistent because many of those questions are morality driven. Yes, of course I would save someone. Force feeding, personally, I would feed them. Safety belt, yes, I would put it. Jehovah's Witnesses, I would allow them to die. I'm inconsistent, I know that. But the point is that maybe this leads us nowhere. I had one more hand, or no?
was going to say, isn't force feeding torture?
This is the argument that has been put forth by people who went before not only the European Court of Human Rights, but also the ICCPR committee. We will see this. We will see what this committee is next week. We will not deal with that case law. But the argument of those people is that you are torturing me. Why? Because this is humiliating. This is degrading treatment. This is, you know, a lower threshold of threshold than torture, but this is the same, and this is absolute bad. And then the question comes of how we define torture. And we go back to the same question, when life begins. And then we go to some wise people in Strasbourg, in Geneva, in Washington, who are called judges. And we tell them, okay, when does life begin? And some of those people will be ultra-religious, and they will tell you, well, my priest told me, or my holy book tells me that life begins. Some other people will have different experiences in life. I told you about the American judges who tend to be in favor of abortion, depending on whether they have daughters or not. Okay? Some other people will, depending on, no, this is very subjective. Let's make a group exercise before we move on. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes, you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you. And then another group behind. Let me think of a case study to you. Okay, abortion, and I want you to examine it from the perspective of dignity, the group here, liberty and autonomy of the mother over there, and did you do the reading, like the utilitarian approach? So you are the utilitarians, you are the dignitarians, and you focus, this was not exactly in the paper I gave you, but you focus on autonomy, the autonomy of the mother. And I want you to examine the question of abortion from that particular philosophical perspective and create arguments to try to convince the other groups why the answer you provide is the right one. Okay? So you're a dignitarian, you're Mr. Kant here, or Mr. Dworkin. Yeah, maybe my accent, sorry. The philosopher, okay? And you are autonomy, and you are utilitarian, you are Mills and...
Should we maybe try and define liberty and autonomy first? Does anybody have any definition of it from
Maybe we
a
can
dictionary or
start
something?
I
The basic definition of it.
my freedom is limited if this does not maximize happiness in the world. Okay? To give you an example, because within this utilitarian what the utilitarian
the
would
right to
say
liberty acts as a substantive guarantee that the rest of the
safety
protection
belt.
will not be
Yes, you're
harmed.
free not to wear a safety belt. But if you don't wear a safety belt, then you will have an accident. You will not be
Ability or state of being
taxpayers will
free,
be paying
the
for you.
power to do
You
as
will
one
not be
pleases,
able to read
freedom from physical
society.
restraint,
You will not make
freedom from
your
arbitrary or
decision,
despotic,
your freedom
the positive
makes
enjoyment
other
of
people
various
happy,
social,
doesn't
political,
maximize
and
happiness in
and
society. So this is the reason why we should limit your
Yeah,
freedom.
the power of
And,
choice matches the benefit. Because without no
binding for
choice,
you.
basically we're in the pro-choice group. That's very similar
So liberty is all about the power of choice. So the mother is the one who chooses to, as to if she wants to conduct an abortion.
There's an actual thing.
Would it be possible to argue that the
Okay,
courts were arguing
And also you say that it'd be dangerous, like it said in that VO case, if you start saying that an unborn baby has rights at the same level as men, then you'd be able to say that, you know, when there's cases of like a woman has to have an abortion because she can't go full time pregnancy otherwise she could die. If
No,
you then
this is
say
dignity,
that
this is
baby's got
not
the same
compliment.
rights,
She said that
then you could say, okay, well actually she has to go full time pregnancy and then she would die.
This is the problem that now is happening in Poland.
I said
Like, that people actually argue. That's why it's like the religion
I
is
said
very
that
You will establish your
Yeah, so
own
the
personal
women are, because there is a bill
philosophical
already in the
school.
parliament for the second
But no,
time.
this idea,
Because the
this
first time
idea is
people
closer
went on the
to
street. The
utilitarianism.
women went on the street because they want
Okay.
to like ban abortion in every case. So even if the mother or the baby or indicate
You
a
will
rape,
have to
now
decide
have
what
to give
dignity
birth
is
to the
about.
baby. So this is what's happening when you have no choice.
Okay, we need to go back
You
to
can
the
actually
article
even
where
die.
we talked about dignity.
Yes, you can use this.
Yeah. So let's see what it says. I'll get it up on
So if you say that there's the power of choice, and
I
if
saw that on
courts are supposed to respect the power of choice, then
I didn't even know it was to do with this course.
and
Yeah, because it's about like the
and
bioethics
the
and things.
sort of
I'll
ways
try
in
to
which
look on them.
the reasoning that judges use to pass judgments does that fall under any of the ones that we're
Did you
talking
read the
about?
article?
Yeah.
Okay.
You talk about how it's
Anyone else read that?
not necessarily a positive obligation, it's just a negative obligation to just, because it said about the freedom from restraint, so that you are able to do what you want. It's a case of just not interfering.
So it becomes a negative obligation.
Yeah.
Liberty is key, but liberty can be
So the state should not interfere
This is
in the
it
mother's
is
choice.
liberalism and it is
as to
also
whether she wants
associated with
to keep a
economics, so
baby.
it is liberal economics are
Dignity as
based on
empowerment. That's
Okay.
the key.
Yeah, that makes sense as well.
So it empowers the individual.
Of course, to certain time because it's not for the entire pregnancy, but to like whatever week. It's like depends on the country.
So here, well here I think it's 24 weeks.
I don't know.
I think that human perspective.
There's in this case that he sent us, there's something on Article 48 that talks about liberty, and I don't know, it just says, in part, even if it were accepted that, subject to certain conditions, the state could allow women to have an abortion if they requested one. The contracting states were not at liberty to exclude the unborn child from the protection of Article 2,
You know, if everyone was
which
the
is
same,
the right
you
to
know,
life.
everything's normal.
I actually quite agree with that, quite personalised in my opinion. What do you think?
just to clarify something. So just to clarify, you're expected to do two things. First, make an argument. From the autonomy perspective, the answer to abortion is this. In favor, against, you decide. And then you need to make some arguments to support your thesis. And try to convince the other groups that your approach is the best one. Okay, so try also to address points that your opponents, the other groups, might be making, so that you convince me that you are giving the right answer. Okay? So two tasks. One, build the thesis, and the second, argument supporting that thesis and covering counter arguments by other groups. Okay?
Is it only the same thing as liberty?
Yeah, so autonomy is not self-government, and it's like if the main argument for abortion is that it's a woman's bodily autonomy, you can't decide what she should do. You take away her right. If you make her body someone else's property, if you
Exactly, like a state property.
so yeah, if you say that she has to care about
And also, if she's not breaching the right to life, because according to law, it's not life,
yeah.
then she's not breaching the person, so she.
And then someday, so if So on the other side, then, if a state was to decide to put in legislation that prevents abortion, that could also bring with it certain problems. For example, so it cannot make a blanket cover on every single woman in that state to not have
But then what
abortion
is
because
Everyone's got all different ideas about what
it just
Okay, so
decisions as to
Make
what to
them-
have abortion are different for every single person in that state. So making a blanket cover saying
I don't know.
nobody's allowed to have
Discussing.
abortion
You're moving to the
really
right
be a
direction.
fair and
If
just
you cannot reach
decision
a
or law.
consensus among you, you cannot agree as to what the answer is and what is dignity, then
There are some
try to
cases,
identify
even
two or
if
three
abortion
different
is illegal, there are some cases that
approaches.
should be legal even
Feel free not to come with one single thesis, but with varieties.
There's a case called Patton, and it's the quote from it is that the fetus can, in English law, in my view, have a right of its own until it's born and has a separate existence from its mother.
Oh, that's
So,
brilliant.
till it's not actually able to have like irrespective of its mother. That was a lot of the decision came. A lot of fathers would take it. Like when the woman would say like, oh, when the baby's born, I'll look after it. And then the court would say, yeah, but for these 9 months up until abortion, then they need the mother because they're not the spouse, so they don't have an existence.
What is this? A common law, the fetus enjoys no legal personality until birth, or at least no legal personality allowing it or its guardians to intervene to prevent destruction.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So it means that until it's
About
born,
the woman.
Because I don't think family has any.
like unless it's basically in abortion law, you have to have 2 doctors' signatures. And it's
I think
illegal to
that
you could intervene
I
to stop
just
it.
like
Stop
if I were
it.
married.
If a woman is to just go and get an abortion pill by herself and take it, that's
my
illegal.
body, if I get married,
Abortion is
husband can
abortion is illegal in the UK, but there's defences for it. So like there's lads that if a woman knew that a woman was going to go and take an abortion pill at 26 weeks without going to a doctor or something like that, then you can intervene to prevent it because then that's actually illegal. But it has no legal and that's it has no legal personality until birth, separate, but it can be protected before that stage.
And then I'm just seeing here that there's you have some information that put if the fetus has a right to live. Maybe I
The society, this is worse for the
No,
society.
I think
Yes, there are
I think
chances
all
that
the
there
same
is once in a
applies
billion
about law because we
the
have
baby
to
miracle that one
So
day
this is quite relevant
because they have
to
to
us.
the baby is really
It's talking about the VO case again.
This
It's just
the
saying
husband had rights to the
that
husband
if we were to bestow a right of life upon a fetus, could we argue that in the context of abortion, the woman's right to autonomy can be overridden because the fetus
the woman's
is
interests
dependent
were
upon her?
relevant with the family, with other kids, so
And that's that either she has responsibility for the welfare of the fetus,
for other
or that
children,
it has a right for her to care for it.
and for the husband.
So what is your thesis here?
That it's a woman's bodily autonomy.
Okay.
So if you were to bestow a right onto the fetus, then that woman no longer has right over her own body.
I think what she's trying to say is that like
Which means that the fire brigade commits a crime every
I
time
have
they
the
put
right
the
to
say
that
in there.
because this is man.
No, but we're also going to the fact that there have been sort of cases, for example, this one that said the fetus cannot, in English law, in my view, have a right of its own until it is separate in existence, separate in existence from the mother. So we are assuming that while the fetus is still not separated from the mother, then the mother has autonomy over her body.
Yes, but this is like the egg made the chicken or the chicken made the egg. This law exists here because of autonomy. You cannot rely on it to make an argument on autonomy. Okay? So this is the consequence, this is the result, this is the output of autonomy. The answer is obviously that because of autonomy, women should be allowed to make their choice, etc. Try to think of counter-arguments they will make and provide
This is what
okay?
cultural sense. So it's like cultural sense of like Mother Nature almost. It's just
So what sort of arguments are they going to make then?
to say that's what
Well, they could make an argument that the mother has a responsibility to that baby until it's born.
I suppose I wouldn't describe it like the umbrella.
It's her right to take care of it.
That's the purpose of the exercise.
And then we could say,
I'll make sure you're the last one to talk so that you
How can we counter?
That's also
try
an
also to think of
morality.
counter arguments to
It's
the
so
other
hard
groups.
to argue.
Okay.
So
So your main
It's
opponent
also
is
more
this group over there.
views, and how you can answer them.
Sorry?
And also based on religion.
Yeah, and how you can argue them.
One person to save like 50.
Yeah, this is
And I think
the
they
main
might
idea.
also come in and say
But your main opponent is the
that
autonomy people
the
who
right to life
that of course you should be
is a blanket
free
right
to do
where
whatever you want. If you want to
nobody-
have
So they might say that
Give us the hardest one.
conducting an abortion is an
Yeah,
interference
really.
with the right to life. So I think that
okay, the next one is going to be an easy.
which we can obviously say, yeah.
You could say that
It's because you're the best here, so we can rely on you.
to have a baby, she's forced to carry that baby from time, say she's been raped, or she knows when she has that baby, she's going to have to give up her adoption because she can't.
One more
That
minute.
could be so psychologically traumatizing that actually then you're breaching her rights just of her rights.
And also in abortion ban in every case, the woman's life is being dangerous. So for example, the doctor says to the woman, oh, you're going to die because you give birth. So then the state is kind of like, it's going to breach the positive right, the right to life over human.
Not a belief that this is not my belief. This is something
Or
that
if the baby is going to die, it's not going to survive the labor, then I don't know, it could be argued that the state never protected the baby.
And also, so the right to life is a negative right. It hands off the state and not supposed to interfere. So in that case, if the woman's life is at risk, for example, then she can have an abortion. Otherwise, the state will be interfering with that.
Now, my question is, from a methodological point of view, this is an hypothesis. It must be tested, and political scientists and economists look into with quantitative analysis, and you cannot say this is
We
one
have come a
example
case of
because there is
deciding
selection
whose life
bias,
is
because you're not the random sample. But economists and political scientists have to be
Yeah,
and maybe
yeah.
this is right, maybe this is
It's
wrong.
dramatic,
But
but
this is
yeah.
why
It's like,
we
I think the woman should be treated
and
as
this
still
is again
one.
why science plays
Not
a very important role in the sense that this could be
Something that really, like,
proportionality in
deep
before it
about
goes.
it, the
And
baby is
if I would be
connected to mother.
the lawyer of the other
Biology.
side, okay, I need evidence supporting this.
So the sex, without like,
Yeah,
sex,
it's
like, we can't
we know
be
nothing.
It's about self-governance and it's about having the power of choice and being free from restraint. And so your decision should not be interfered with in your face.
Okay, so the bottom line is that are you allowed or not?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So the argument here is as simple as that. Making an abortion is like making a tattoo. Okay? It's my right to make a tattoo or piercing or whatever. In the same way, I should be allowed to have an abortion. This is my body. Okay? Are you all okay with this conclusion?
Yeah.
Okay. Second group. Utilitarianism. Can someone, before giving us the answer, can you tell to the rest of the class what utilitarianism is in very simple terms?
So the utilitarian approach to anything is that there needs to be greatest good for the greatest number, and your freedom can be limited only if it does not benefit society as a whole. And moving on to our argument, we believe that...
So, a break. What this theory says is it is close to this one because it relies on liberty, on autonomy, and says, yes, if you want to have a tattoo, piercing, euthanasia, an abortion, do it as long as this does not undermine general interest, the happiness of the society. Okay? So what we want to do is we will limit your autonomy when this is necessary because more people will be happy with you being unhappy. Okay? So, what is your conclusion?
We believe that right to choice is most important in this context, and we believe that every woman should have a right to abort unless it interferes with her physical well-being, because she's already somebody who's contributing to society.
Okay. Other arguments with respect to that?
There is a correlation between negligence and crime, meaning that statistics have shown that a child in care is 5 times more likely to commit crimes. Therefore, could be argued that by not being born, you would prevent the crime, thus creating greater good for the society. I feel really bad saying that.
So, are you in favor of allowing abortion, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes? The argument here, and for instance, this, I know this, I've read actually statistics with regard to what is the state in, do you know New Haven, Yale, New Haven, the city? Yeah, what is the state?
Columbia?
Is it? I don't think so. Anyway, it is a particular state in the United States, and abortion was not allowed until early 80s, okay? The early 80s. After that, it was allowed, and 10 years, 15 years later on, they saw that the crime rate went down. Why? Statisticians, political scientists say that there is a correlation between crime and abortion. Why? Poorest families were not allowed to have an abortion, they would raise kids, they would be negligent as parents, the chances for them to become criminals were higher. So an argument here is, yes, I'm provoking here, let's kill a baby, let's kill someone if the chances are that he or she will become a killer. Okay? You disagree with it?
No. I think there is definitely a correlation between these two, because there are more and more cases where the abortion is banned in the states where abortion is banned. That there are so many killed babies, newborn babies, because the mothers are just because they were not allowed to have an abortion. They maybe just too ashamed to give back the baby. It's just too many psychological cases, but basically state officials, they find more and more dead.
So
newborn
parents
babies.
kill babies after. So it's better to kill it before it is born than killing it afterwards. It's the argument.
I know, but
No, I know it happens in the society, but I'm just saying how silly those parents are. But yeah. And now the dignitarian, my favorite group. What is your thesis?
I think we're all pro abortion.
We couldn't even agree in what is dignity, because we were talking about this, and the idea of dignitarian is to protect human dignity. But then you said, whose dignity? Woman dignity, baby's dignity. It depends on the society, and then we said it is very culturally sensitive concept. And at the end of the day, trying to do an argument against autonomy, we said that a baby is a human being, and it should have dignity and should have a right to life. But it's just it's not easy to determine whether.
So it changes depending on whether you approach this from the perspective of the dignity of the baby or the fetus, or the dignity of the mother, and you were not in a position to reach a consensus as to what human dignity is. Okay?
Our argument were if a baby has a right to life, the fetus has a right to life, and a woman that carries a baby has a right to life, whose life is important, it just creates a paradox. So who can decide whose life is more important?
But this, we do it in order to answer the question of whether the baby has a life, etc. And from an autonomy perspective, the idea is, me, the mother, I will decide. I decide.
This is not something that I necessarily agree with, because you can quantify the contribution that the mother is making to society, therefore her life is more valuable, whereas a child, you can't predict the contribution that they will make.
This would be a utilitarian argument.
Okay.
This would be a utilitarian argument. I want one counter. So, with regard to dignity, you had a difficult task. Dignity is a mega concept, okay? It means everything and nothing. You will find scholars who absolutely adore it. You have philosophers who have built their philosophy on human dignity. I mentioned Kant, Dworkin, okay? You have philosophers who rely on it and they try to conceptualize it and make it a tool that can be useful for human rights. You have other scholars who say dignity, it means nothing. Personally, but this is my personal opinion, you may agree or you may disagree, every time I see something on dignity, I say, oof, another priest. Why? Because dignity means different things to different people. But you have legal systems that rely on dignity. The German Constitutional Court and the German Basic Law, the German Constitution, rely on dignity. The European Court of Human Rights has reluctantly, I mean, it's not using very often the term dignity, but in some cases, especially in the latest cases, it is relying on dignity. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights is relying much more on human dignity. Okay, so this is a very convenient basis for human rights lawyers because everything we want to protect it in the sense that, yeah, this is a question of dignity. And then, yeah, all of a sudden this is something very important. Personally, I think that this is a slippery slope because we don't have consensus as to what dignity is, and it is an all-encompassing concept that does not give me legal certainty. You disagreed among you, so 5 people, 6, 7 people, you disagreed as to what is dignity and how it applies here. I want one counter-argument by each group. You choose the other group you want to fight. So let's start from you now. So you will fight against one of the other groups. Give me an idea. Give me an argument.
We fight utilitarianism.
Uh-huh.
And we would say society is made up of individuals and the greater good is subjective. Why should I consent to you sending me to die in your political war, or my children should be farmed to your purposes?
Any answer to that? So we shouldn't look at the big picture, but we should focus on each individual, and the purpose of human rights is to protect each person in particular. What do you say on this?
That's not even the principle of utilitarianism. You're saying that at the end of the day, it's not about it's about an individual person, but as long as it doesn't interfere with the greater good of society. Here, in this case, allowing someone to get an abortion means lesser medical bills, lesser healthcare, lesser whatever other investment that goes into it, or money that is spent into it. So you're economically putting a limit on it while giving people the choice.
Okay. Fair enough. You attack with steam.
Why are you looking at me?
You're the most aggressive among them.
Oh.
Any counter arguments against another group? I would attack the autonomy people. They are
What's
against.
wrong with them?
Don't want to. Okay, autonomy people.
I was thinking maybe to the dignity people, what about the dignity of the father of the child?
That's my point. Everyone hated me for it.
Because you're the only male and the only father in the group. Makes sense.
No, because he was saying that when you get married, then you get an object, like kind of an object with the guy. Like he has all the decisions over your body. I don't agree with that.
No, I didn't say that. I said the
Like-
family is a unit.
But
And
I
you
don't
disrespect
think
the family,
the
so
family
the
has any
family.
decision over my body.
Sorry.
Like for example, if I get married, I wouldn't allow my husband to choose what I want to do with my
No, but
body.
like, what if that person, the father, would then have the baby? You just don't want to have the baby. You get divorced, and you don't want to have the baby, but the father desperately wants that baby.
There was the opposite case before the European Court of Human Rights.
Until the day they create a synthetic uterus that can carry it outside of the woman's
I mean,
body,
yeah, I think that,
the father
That will be the
will
end of
actually
human rights.
not
Okay.
have the right to
Okay.
tell anyone.
So my point here is the following, and just this is not an argument that I made. So this is first of all philosophy. If you remember at the very first seminar, I told you that human rights, international human rights protection, has an international law dimension. It has a constitutional law dimension, like a relationship with the state, positive, negative limitations, etc. But then, in the end of the day, everything is a question of philosophy, everything in life, but in particular, with regard to human rights, we are dealing with questions of what is right and what is wrong. Okay? The second point I want to make is that you have this big debate in international human rights law, and we will see this in a few minutes, as to whether we should focus on states and state will, state consensus, or whether judges should be allowed to dictate, I'm using this term on purpose, to dictate human rights standards on the basis of their own personal opinion as to what is right and what is wrong. The problem with the latter, the second scenario, is, and this is what I was trying to show you here, is that there is no one single understanding in the society of what is right and what is wrong. We have different principles, and those principles do not always give the same result. Depending on whether you are a utilitarian or a libertarian, you will give a different answer. Not in that particular example, but in other examples. Okay? So my point here is that philosophy does not give one single answer, and it is very subjective. Clear for everyone? A counter-argument against utilitarianism. This is associated, if you want more, with capitalism. It has a clear economic dimension, etc., etc. But a big counter-argument is that, okay, if we only do what maximizes happiness for the society, then if someone is sick, we should not cure that person. Instead, we should use that person for transplantation. Because his eyes will make happy one person, his liver will make happy another person, his stomach will make happy another person, and he's happy. So we sacrifice one, and we give back life to a bigger nine. So there are extremes to each theory, and each theory has counter-arguments. But my point is that there is no there is no one single approach to human rights. And sometimes we are even inconsistent in our personal value system. If I would ask you, if I would make a questionnaire here, and I would ask you to answer that questionnaire, it would be very easily to identify which are the principles, and these are not the only principles, of course, which are the premises on the basis of which you're providing your answer. And trust me, most of us, we would be inconsistent. In the sense that when it comes to one question, we would be a utilitarian, but when it would come to another question, we would be more libertarians or more dignitarians. Okay? Any questions so far? Questions? No? Okay. Frete versus Atala, Rifo, and daughters. Niñas. Where is we don't have any. Yes. In niñas. Isn't it? Yes. Okay. Facts of the case is, what is the big contrast, the big difference between the two approaches by the two courts? The facts of the Frete case, or Frete.
The main difference is that they didn't, in the European court, did not find a violation of discrimination for the sexual orientation, whereas in the Inter-American court they found it. They said it was a discriminatory treatment between.
With regard to what? The facts of this case?
Oh, the custody.
In the Chile case, there was a mother of 3 who had separated from her husband, and then they'd agreed that she'd get custody of the children. But then a few years later, she came out as a lesbian, and then the father took her to court where it was ruled that he would be given custody again over her. And then when she appealed to the Inter-American Court, they ruled that her rights had been breached, and ruled that there was a prohibition on any rules or discriminatory practice which was based on sexual orientation.
So the Inter-American Court case is a very banal divorce case, okay? Banal in a sense. It is the dispute between a mother and the father about custody, okay? So the mother and the father are fighting. At the beginning they have reached an agreement and the mother would have the custody. But then the mother said, you know, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I'm lesbian. And the father said, yes, there is no way my children will be in the same house with a lesbian, will be brought up by a lesbian. He went before national court, Chilean court, and the Chilean court said, yes, you're a lesbian, you're not allowed to be a mother, okay? And she went before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights said, well, this is discrimination. Whether, did it apply proportionality?
No. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Inter-American Court said discrimination is just concern, so.
Yes, but it applied proportionality. So, although they have said this is jus cogens, they applied proportionality in what sense? They said, okay, let's see what reasons would justify limiting the right to custody. And then they said, well, they took all the arguments against gay adoption, okay? That there are dangers for the child, consequences, physical development, etc., etc. And then they rejected each one of them on the basis also of scientific evidence or because of the lack of scientific evidence. Okay? So they applied proportionality and they said there is no reason justifying discrimination. What did the European Court of Human Rights do?
It was quite a different case because Fred, who I don't know how to pronounce well,
Fred
wanted to adopt a child.
Okay.
But he declared that he was an homosexual.
Okay.
And so the services from France said he wasn't like suitable to actually have a baby or a baby or a child because of his sexual orientation. But they didn't say explicitly that. They said his lifestyle or his choice of lifestyle or something like that. And then he went to the European Court, and the European Court said that actually, yeah, it could be possible because they didn't really know what would be the consequences of having a child raised by a homosexual woman.
So this is a case of adoption. Someone asks from the state, from social services, to adopt a child, and he says, you know something, by the way, I'm homosexual. And then they say, well, if you're a homosexual, you're not getting a child. They try to serve it in a very polite way, but the bottom line was this. You are a homosexual, you're not able, you're not capable of adopt child. Okay? And that person went before the European Court of Human Rights. What did the European Court of Human Rights say? It employed the same technique as in the Vogue case about the unborn fetus as we discussed earlier. What is this technique? It's very interesting. You're also talkative when I'm not asking you to discuss reading that you had to do.
No consensus.
No consensus. What is this consensus idea?
So the applicant noted that there was no consensus in democratic societies on the need for single homosexuals to be barred totally from adoption. So
consensus meaning what?
The different approaches by the different parties to the convention.
The European doesn't know in more detail. I gave you the other one was extra reading, so I don't expect you. It was a long one on custom and customary law and consensus. My paper with Constantine. But does anyone know what European consensus is, or consensus as a method of interpretation?
I didn't have a good paper. Like,
Sorry?
the link didn't work.
I sent, yeah.
I didn't get it.
The issue was raised, and then I sent another link on Friday.
I didn't get any.
You didn't get any email,
No. I didn't get it.
but you received the original one.
The one that you sent me after I asked, but I didn't really get it.
It's a nightmare with this. Anyways, yeah. Email me again and I'll send you the
Yeah,
links.
thank you. European consensus.
What is European consensus? What is this tool by the European Court of Human Rights?
It's looking at the majority. What is the majority?
Okay. Majority of what?
Of the states. So if you've got 20 states, then you have what the majority of those states that are on a particular issue based on their domestic law.
European consensus. This is a method of interpretation that has been created by the European Court of Human Rights. Okay? It does not exist in the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. There is no prior practice by other courts. So what the European Court of Human Rights is doing is that when it is faced with morally sensitive cases or politically sensitive cases, instead of saying, well, I'm a utilitarian, I'm a dignitarian, I'm a libertarian, this is the answer. Life starts at that point. You're allowed to walk out in the streets naked. Instead of giving an answer on the basis of what it seems to be right by the majority of the judges, it follows another method. What is this method? It says the European Convention of Human Rights needs to be interpreted in the light of evolution. So it is a living instrument. How will capture evolution? It has different ways to capture evolution. Sometimes it examines the practice of the United Nations, international law, international treaties, but sometimes it says, well, we are a closed club of states. We are 47 states in Europe. Let me see how this question is answered, is addressed by the member states. And it is counting case. It says, well, I have 45 states, 30 of them are in favor of abortion. Well, there is a consensus. 25 of them are in favor, changed their legislation in the past 5 years in favor of same-sex partnership. Something is changing in the society. Let me adopt this and let me make it a European standard. Okay? If there is no European consensus, the European Court of Human Rights gives what it calls margin of appreciation. So states are free to do whatever they want. So European consensus is a method of interpretation. The problem with European consensus is that the court has not given an authentic definition, so it is using it sometimes inconsistently, or anyway, scholars, we are trying to understand what European consensus is, and there are different approaches between scholars also as to what European consensus is. But the core of European consensus is comparative studies. The European Court of Human Rights compares the practice, the state practice, of the signatories to the European Convention of Human Rights, and if it sees that they are changing, that there is a trend, an evolution, the majority of them are moving towards a direction, then it updates the European Convention of Human Rights and it establishes a new standard.
I found it interesting in reading that consensus, as a result of the consensus, it was found that same-sex couples do not have a right to marriage. However, from a similar consensus, it was found that when states enact sort of alternative forms,
They have a right to civil union.
yeah, so sort of same consensus, but sort of two different approaches came from it.
We were discussing this also last week here. Were you in the class?
That might have been a bit late.
Yeah, but yeah. So this is exactly this point was made last year. So good point. So, question first, number one for you. Do you think that gay people should adopt children? Yes or no?
Yes, sorry.
Yes?
I wouldn't say they should adopt children if they
They should be allowed.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah? Should be allowed?
I think
Anyone saying no?
should first ask the children.
Eh?
Should first ask the children.
To ask the child. If the child is 2 years old, a baby?
No.
No. So, no adoption yet. So, who else is saying no? Don't be afraid, I mean to... No?
Oh yeah, I'm saying yes.
Yes? No? Yes? Yes? Everyone? Yes? No? Yes? This is, I wanted it another group, there will be some fight between you.
I would say that whether homosexual or heterosexual, it would depend on the child's best interest. So,
Okay, what is the child's best interest? This is a criterion that both the European Court of Human Rights and the Inter-American Court are using. So they say, and the European Court of Human Rights has very explicitly said that the adoption is not to make the parents happy, but it is to save, to make the child happy. So what is the child's best interest?
It's not be rated in orphanage.
It's better than an orphanage.
Yeah.
I mean, the state has to actually be sure that the couple or the people or the person who's going to adopt the child is going to take care of him or her and give
So this applies to both heterosexual and
Yeah.
or homosexuals or heterosexuals. Yes. But otherwise, would you be happy with? All of you, no blood in this. Okay, I'll move on. Second question. You have two courts which are faced with similar, yes, they are not exactly the same, but similar questions. One court says very explicitly, well, what are Latin American states doing? They don't like the idea of adoption by gay people or by custody by homosexuals, okay? Well, I don't care. This is what the judge says. Well, this is Latin America, I don't care. How many Latin American states are under the Inter-American Convention? Roughly?
There's 20 odd, I think.
20 something? Okay. So what I'll provoke you a bit here, but what the judge at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights says is, okay, there are 20 sovereign states. I don't care. Behind them, there are 20 highest or supreme constitutional courts. I don't care. Behind them, there are 20 parliaments. And in each parliament, there are representatives from each area of this continent. Well, I don't care. They are all blind. They don't know what human rights is. I will tell you what human rights is. Human rights is that no discrimination on the basis of sexuality. Do you like this idea?
When you say it like that, no.
That this is what the court is doing.
And Latin American countries are creating different instruments in order to protect themselves from the court. For example, in Mexico, the Mexican Supreme Court released a jurisprudence that said that even though if the Inter-American Court says something in order to protect human rights, every time it has to be compared to the Constitution, and in case of doubt, they have to ask the Mexican Supreme Court. And then the Mexican Supreme Court interpreted in order that, yeah, this is what the Inter-American Court said, but as Mexicans, we don't really like homosexuals to be adopted, so.
Exactly the same happens in the European Convention of Human Rights, and exactly the same happens in EU law, not with regard to human rights, but also with regard to human rights, but also other areas of law. And this is something that always happens in complete federations, because you have an overarching structure where you have a court, but the court is dealing with different sovereignties, and each court, each national court says conditionality. Well, I will comply with what you say as long as it is compatible with my constitution. And we call it judicial dialogue. It is actually judicial fight. They hate each other and they try to prove that I am right and you're wrong. And you have exactly the same thing here the Russian Constitutional Court is not complying with the European Court of Human Rights. The UK is not complying, prisoners' rights, for instance. Italy sometimes raises issues, and there is. This is also central to why the European Court of Human Rights applies this consensus method. I'll come back to that in a minute. So, do you like the approach by the Inter-American Court? Yes or no?
I don't like the approach, but I like their decision.
You like the decision, but not the approach.
Yeah.
How else could they reach that conclusion?
Well, they did a lot of, I guess, I mean, it's still controversial, but they compared it to the European courts, wasn't they?
The European Court of Human Rights is more conservative than the Inter-American Court in that respect. Sometimes, and this has happened also in the European Court of Human Rights, if they want to reach a decision and there is no European consensus, they say, okay, there is no European consensus, but I don't care. Why? Because there is international consensus. Because the UN said that. Because they try to find an alternative way. But do you like the idea that judges will decide on those questions, especially after the discussion we've had earlier about what is dignity, what is autonomy, what is all these moral principles?
That's what they're for, man. That's what they are there for.
That's why they are there for. I want to tell you that this is not why they are, especially in international law, they are bound, they are given powers by states and they should comply with what states want. In domestic law, maybe you could say, but again you will have the dilemma between parliamentary sovereignty in the UK or what the will of the people is versus an elite which is appointed to set standards. So what I'm saying here is that the same dilemma applies both at the international and at the constitutional national level. At the international level, it is judges versus state sovereignty. And this is what European consensus is all about. At the national level, it could be parliaments and majority versus judges. So, who should decide?
I personally don't like the degree of judicial creativity that's being taken. I feel like they're trying to perform a quasi-legislative function, and I think that's what the courts are there to do. They're there to interpret the laws, and if there's been a clear expression of state, well, no, this is not what we want, then I think courts should be conforming with that.
Okay, so you're against judicial activism?
I think so. Especially to this extent. I think it's...
Who agrees with that point? The question here is, what are the limits of judicial interpretation? When we go before judges, judges will be faced with that kind of questions. They need to reach a decision. They can either make a step back and say, well, what are states doing? Or, what did the parliament say? Is there in the text of the Inter-American Convention, of the American Convention on Human Rights, something about gay rights? No, there is nothing. So states did not want to do that. Or the judge can make a step ahead and say, you know something? Human rights need to be, and then you have all these methods, evolutive interpretation, principles, dignity, etc. And say, yes, these are human rights. Whether you like it or not, this is it.
This is bringing us again to the discussion that we were having in the last session about the humanization of international law, like whether the states judge could actually have this power, even though it could be against the will of the state. So we have to determine whether human rights are more important than the state's will in the international law system.
What do you think then? Human rights or state will? Human rights, a priest. Any other priests in this room? A priest? Yeah, a priest? Yeah, priest? Okay. The priesthood?
That was a question. I suppose to a certain extent, a legal positivist in some respect.
Legal positivist.
I'd like to know where the laws come from. They should be traceable to, they need to have a foundation. I don't think in this case it was strong enough.
this is the other big problem with human rights. Legal positivism promises certainty. Says you will follow that form, you will follow that procedure, and the output will be clear. You will know whether there is a law or not, whether there is a right or not. This is a false promise in general, but especially in human rights, it's much more difficult. Why? Because on the one hand you have judges, and judges, by interpreting the law, they create law. They create new standards, they set standards. They say, I deleted it, but you should be dressed this way. You are allowed to protection 3 weeks after inception, okay? At the same time, if you go at the international level, the rules are made by states. So this translates into a dilemma or a conflict between sovereignty.
So is this criminal law?
No. Yeah, we're finishing in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So, the one question is, so the first dilemma is sovereignty versus judicial interpretation on the basis of principles, etc., etc. The second one, at the national level, it is the will of many, democracy, majority, versus justice, or parliamentary sovereignty versus judicial control, and the limits of constitutionality, the limits of constitutional control. Second point, we will continue next week. Can you start signing, because we are in a rush? Can someone take the rest? Yeah. Second point, as you said, this also translates into the debate about the humanization of international. Sources of international law, international custom. If you remember semester 1, we were discussing about the idea of a new custom which, unlike the old one, does not take into account state practice, but mainly relies on opinio juris. It is the same idea. It's because of human rights, because we need to protect human rights, because we are priests, I ask you, because we are priests, human rights are very serious to leave it to what states want to do. And this had a debate, this led to a debate about whether we should change the definition of custom or whether we should have special sources, special ways for making the law in the case of human rights. Third and very final point. The European Court of Human Rights, and we can discuss it also next week, I can take 5 minutes to discuss this idea, is relying on European consensus in order to maintain a balance between those two. And this way, it is protecting its own legitimacy. So that Mexico doesn't react against the Inter-American Clause and says, I'm a sovereign state, you will not tell me what to do with gay people. The European Court of Human Rights says, well, I'm not telling you. Look at your peers. This is, the majority of states are doing this. So it is not something that I invented. It is what other states are doing. But we will discuss this next week in more detail. If by tomorrow you haven't received a reading list, there is a problem with the reading list, just email me and I will respond to you, okay? I will send you a reading list, either me or Brad, Joshua, by this afternoon, okay?